Okay, today we're replacing a fork seal on a 1981 Honda CB750. These forks are pretty comparable to anything made after the mid-70s. Even early 70s will work too. But the basic concept of what we're about to show you can be applied to multiple bikes throughout an era of about 20 years. So, this is the ring that we're going to be replacing. And it sits in here. And what it does is it holds the oil that's located down here in place and doesn't allow it to come up here and get all over your fork tubes here. And one way to tell if your fork seal is bad is if you're getting oil up here every time your shocks here are actuating. So the first thing we're going to do, if you have a 1981, is you need to bleed the air out of the actual forks itself. So up here, what you want to do is you want to take the cap off here, bleed out all the air, and take the little tube off that connects these two together. Now generally what you're going to do is you're going to replace this fork first. And then you can do this fork. But we already did this fork, and now we're going to do this one. So now that the air is already drained out, we're going to drain the oil out with this nut down here, which requires a number 10. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to take the spring out of here by loosening this cap. You may have to loosen this bolt right here to release this pressure off this cap. So we're going to take the cap off. Now be careful, because once it comes towards the end of its travel, the spring will pop. So apply pressure to that cap and pull out slowly. Now we're going to take our spring out. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to pry this dust seal up, and we're going to hold it up. And there's a few more rings and other stuff in there that we're going to have to pry up and hold up. So as you can see, you can just grab a screwdriver, get it under there, and work it up. So next, after we get our dust seal up, we need to get this snap ring out of here. As you can see, it's a little ring with two holes in it that require special tools, and you stick the tools in those two holes and you squeeze together. Now that should loosen the tension that it has in the grooves on this piece of metal right here. So once you get it like that, pull it up and then hold it up. Now there's another metal ring in there below the snap ring that you have to get out as well. This one comes out a lot easier. So get it out and hold it up with the rest of your handy dandy pieces of metal and rubber up here. Okay, so now that we have those metal pieces out of here, what we need to do is loosen a bolt that's on the underside of here. That has to be loosened in order to continue on and actually break this whole section off the actual fork. So one tip you can do is stick some kind of metal rod in here and then hold this in place, keep this from rotating as you unscrew that bolt. Now a little bit of oil may come out, but it shouldn't be much since you already drained the majority of the oil in the beginning. So just be careful of that. So now that that's separated, that disconnects this housing from this. It's not going to appear so in the first, because what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to do a slide hammer action to actually separate the bushing in there from the actual fork. And now we're disconnected. Okay, so now these are all the pieces that are underneath inside here. Here is this little pesky bad seal that needs to be replaced. So as you can see, it looks almost identical to our new one. Okay, now this is just a housing that this kind of sits over, and you can kind of see how it's like that. It fits into place. So you know which direction that should go, which is up. Here we have our bushing, and here we have our retaining ring. Okay, now there's also this piece right here that connects to the end of here. Like so. It was on there when we pulled it off, it just falls off without this being on it. That's what that screw underneath here connects into and holds this housing to this whole section. If you notice, this won't come out, this will stay in place. Okay, so now what we need to do is move these all up with our other things. Well, we need to get the retaining ring off. So remove those off the fork completely. Same with this. No, do not remove this yet. This is your bad seal, okay? Now if you're like us, we don't have, we're using just basically common household tools. We don't have any special tools to do this because they really aren't required so long as you use some ingenuity. Now there's a driver, like a pile driver type tool that we're gonna need later on. However, we don't have one, so we're going to use this to drive our new seal into place, which we'll show you a little bit later. But for now, you want to take all those off, and you want to clean all these dirt and gunk and old oil off here. Because anything under this seal, we don't want to damage our new seal, because that's what holds the oil in place and does not allow it to go any further up on the fork. So now what we're just going to do is just start cleaning basically on the inside of here and on the outside. What we're going to do is we're going to run some alcohol through the actual fork tube and try to clean out the inside of here a little bit and run a couple of rags down there and get it nice and clean. Probably want something under that. Okay, so now that we got this off, you also want to clean the inside of this because this builds up the dirt and grime down here that ends up screwing up your seal. So use some sort of high-powered wash or spray, get a rag in there, clean all the dirt and dust off. Okay? So now that we have everything clean, all the parts clean, our next step is to put this seal on here. Okay? Now, if you notice on the inside of this seal, there's ridges. Alright? There's two small ones and one big ridge. You want the two small ridges facing towards the bottom. So just like this, as you can see now the two small ridges are on the bottom and the big one's on the top, and that's how it's going to go on. Now, when we're actually putting this on now, make sure to lubricate the inside of the actual seal itself. And lubricate the shaft as well. You need a nice lubricated shaft. So this is going to go on with our two ridges, the small ones on the bottom, and we're going to put it below the old one. Now, next step is we're going to put that ring that fits snugly into place, and the bushing is going to go next, followed by that spacer thingy that, you know, keeps everything in place. You may have to use a screwdriver to separate it. That should snap into place, and that shouldn't go up any higher than where it was before. Just like that. Now those can come back down to where they were. Now the next step is to put that little metal piece that we had here back on. So as you could see before, we were having trouble keeping it up once we actually took this housing off. So it's recommended that you actually take some grease and grease it to hold this in place for when we put our metal housing here back on. It doesn't need a whole lot, just enough to keep it in place. Just like that. Alright, so our next step is we're going to put the housing back on. But first, before we do that, we're going to lube up the outside of our bushing and that other ring on the bottom there. Okay, so we're going to stick this back on. And what we want to do is we want to get this bolt that we took out earlier back in, but we don't want to tighten it all the way. Just put it on snug and we'll torque it down once we have all our seals and all the other metal parts set into place. But for now, we just want to put it back on so it holds it in place. Okay, so now that we have our housing back on, being held in very loosely by this bolt, You want to double check and make sure here with this one that's either already done or the one that you haven't done yet, that this housing is even with this. Because if it's not even, the giant rod that goes through here won't match up right. So we have it even now. Our next step is going to be to lubricate the outside of our new seal. Okay, now that we have that lubricated, we're going to go ahead and we're going to move this down into place where it was before. Now, this is where our driver comes into place, because on that new rubber seal, you don't want to put a screwdriver on it and start tapping it all the way around because you're going to damage the rubber on it. So instead, we're going to apply even pressure by taking the grips of some pliers here and hammering on the old one, because we don't care if the old one is damaged. Now that's going to go down all the way until it can't go down anymore. Not the old seal, but the new seal below the old one. Okay, so now we finished using this as a driver to the old seal to drive the new seal in place, which is down here. So this is the old one, and we use that to hammer it evenly, the new seal into place, as you can see. Now there's grooves on the inside of this where the snap ring goes. Make sure to hammer that seal enough to where it's slightly below those grooves so you can get the snap ring in place. Okay? So it's going to take some effort. You might get a little frustrated as of right now. We got a little frustrated doing it because we're not using conventional tools. We're just using what we have at home. And I literally kicked the knee out of the cameraman. He's using a crutch right now. So we finally got it in place. So now what we need to do is we need to get this old one off. We're not going to show you how we're going to get it off, but we suggest that you actually take the fork tube out of the triple trees up here and slide it off. Okay? And when you do that, keep in mind the order of operations that those pieces up here taped together are. So now what we're going to do, now that we have our seal in place, is we're going to take the metal ring that's below the snap ring and set it down in there. So now we have the metal ring on top of our seal. Next comes the snap ring, the one where we requires our special little tools. And remember, there are grooves inside that metal housing here that snap ring must fit into. Okay, now, if you put your snap ring in and that other metal part in, and you realize that you don't have the seal far enough down in order to get the snap ring into the grooves that are inside of here, what you can do is keep the snap ring and the other metal that's in there in place, take some screwdriver, or take some pliers, use the butt, and then hammer it in around until you get that snap ring either into the grooves or the actual new seal down far enough to where you can get the snap ring into the grooves. And just keep going around it like this and look at it real close and see if the snap ring is in the grooves. We did it, and we are now in the grooves. Okay, now that we have our snap ring in place, we can put the dust seal back down and hammer that in. Or you actually might be able to just use your fingers. Okay, so now that we have that dust seal back into place, we have to go back and retighten the bolt that's on the very bottom that we snugly tightened earlier. So now that we're going to do that, to prevent the housing from spinning, we put our rod back in there that went through our tire. We just put it back into place to hold that housing from spinning. So the setting for this specific bike is 6 to 9 foot-pounds torque. Make sure to look up the specific specification for yours in your repair manual or service manual. Now, what we need to do next is we need to fill this whole thing with oil. Okay? So before we do that, we're going to put our drain screw back into place. Tighten that to a reasonable setting. So now what we're going to do next is we're going to fill our forks with the oil that is required in them. Now, a lot of places will tell you to buy fork oil, but that's really stupid, because all fork oil really does is the same thing as basic motor oil. So as you can see here, I have some just name brand 10W30. What's important is the weight, okay? So 10 weight. So use anywhere between 7 and 10. So that's what we're going to do. We're not going to buy 4 Cokes. It's going to be about 8 times as expensive. Now my specific bike calls for anywhere between 5.8 and 8 ounces of oil. Look it up for yours. We're going to put in 8 ounces of oil for mine. I'm going to pull it out. Needs more. Make sure I have enough. Alright, that's a perfect amount of oil. So now that we have that in there, we can go ahead and put our spring back in. So now that we have our spring in, we can put our cap back on. Now it should be a little tricky, but I shouldn't have to tell you guys that. And we're going to tighten that down. You want it pretty snug. You don't want to over tighten it and ruin it, but you also don't want it coming out. So now that we have that tightened down, we can go ahead, I'm going to finger tighten this real quick. Then we're going to go ahead and retighten these. Okay. So once these are retightened, you're actually done. So now what you can do is, if you want, you can take this back out, and you can actually take this by hand and run it up and down. Okay. And when you run it up and down, you might notice a little bit of oil that's still coming up on here. Don't worry, you didn't screw up your seal. What it is it's some of the old oil that was still in there from before. So as we can see, there's just a little bit of old dirt in there, and you want to wipe that off as you go. Just do it a couple times. Get the old dirt and stuff and grime that's out of there. It's just on the parts. But as you can see from, we're going to do it one more time, and as you can see, there's no more of that really viscous oil that you were having before that was coming up, because that seal is now doing its job properly. And that's how you replace a fork seal. Anyone can do it at home. It does take some time, especially the first time. It took us about a total of 4 hours to figure out how to do this the first time, and after that it took us maybe no more than 45 minutes. Thank you for watching.